I'm Sophia, 34 years old today, standing in my decorated backyard surrounded by smiling faces. 8 years of marriage to James had slowly transformed from romantic to restrictive. Despite the streamers and champagne, tension lingered beneath my birthday celebration. My laugh, the one James increasingly criticized as too loud, was becoming rarer these days. I still hoped today would be different until James arrived 3 hours late with Amanda, his attractive new co-worker, trailing behind him. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from and hit that subscribe button as I share how my birthday party became the turning point I never expected. My career as a pediatric nurse at Boston Children's Hospital has always been my anchor. The challenging shifts, the resilient children, and the supportive team had sustained me through difficult times. This was where I first met James, at the hospital's annual fundraising gala 10 years ago. He was representing his pharmaceutical company, confidently working the room with his perfect smile and tailored suit. I was volunteering at the event, and when I accidentally spilled water on his expensive shoes, he laughed instead of getting angry. That laugh was what made me fall for him initially, warm, genuine, and kind. Our courtship was a whirlwind of romantic restaurants, weekend getaways to Cape Cod, and long conversations about our dreams. James was ambitious, charismatic, and attentive. He remembered my favorite flowers, peonies, listened intently to my hospital stories, and made me feel like the most fascinating woman in any room. When he proposed after 8 months with a sunset picnic on the harbor, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Our wedding 2 years after meeting was everything I'd dreamed of, not extravagant but beautiful. My sister Haley was my maid of honor, my best friend Melanie arranged the flowers, and James's eyes welled with tears as I walked down the aisle. We wrote our own vows, promising to support each other's dreams and grow together through life's challenges. I remember feeling invincible that day, like we had decoded the secret to lasting happiness. The first years of marriage unfolded like a highlight reel. We bought our Victorian-style house in a leafy Boston suburb, spent our savings on renovating the kitchen, and traveled to Italy for our delayed honeymoon. We talked about having children soon, once James secured his promotion and I completed my specialized pediatric certification. We hosted dinner parties where James would proudly introduce me as the compassionate heart of Boston Children's Hospital. I felt loved, respected, and secure. The shift happened so gradually that I struggled to pinpoint exactly when things changed. Around our 3rd anniversary, James received his first major promotion, and the subtle criticisms began. It started with my appearance. That shirt makes you look a little heavy, don't you think? Or maybe you should try a different hairstyle, something more professional. I brushed these comments off as his attempt to help me look my best. Then came the financial monitoring. James suggested merging our accounts for simplicity, but soon I found myself explaining every purchase. A new pair of shoes prompted questions about whether I really needed another pair. Lunch with colleagues became wasteful spending. I started hiding small purchases, feeling guilty about buying a coffee on my way to work. My friendships became his next target. When Melanie called to chat, James would hover nearby, asking, "How much longer will you be?" When I mentioned plans with friends, he'd say, "Again? Didn't you just see them last month?" Eventually, it became easier to decline invitations than to navigate his disapproval afterward. In public, James became the master of the backhanded compliment. "Sophia finally found a dress that flatters her figure," he'd tell our friends, or "She's trying so hard to understand the investment strategy one explained." Each comment delivered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I became hyper-aware of my behavior around others, trying to avoid anything that might trigger his criticism later. As James climbed the corporate ladder, becoming regional director for his pharmaceutical company, the power dynamic in our relationship shifted further. His stress levels increased with the longer hours and greater responsibilities. He'd come home exhausted, barely acknowledging my presence before disappearing into his home office. When I'd ask about his day, he'd sigh dramatically and say, "You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under." My own career achievements seemed to irritate rather than impress him. Last year's birthday marked a painful milestone. James completely forgot, and when I mentioned it over dinner, he became defensive, blaming me for not reminding him. "You know how busy I am right now. If it was really important to you, you should have put it on my calendar." I ended up apologizing to him, a twisted scenario that now makes me cringe to recall. Throughout these changes, I developed coping mechanisms. The most notable was my laugh. Once natural and free, it became a tool to diffuse tension. When James criticized me, I'd laugh lightly to show I wasn't affected. When he made those cutting remarks at social gatherings, I'd laugh to transform them into apparent jokes. My laugh became both my shield and my prison. My sister Haley noticed the changes first. During our monthly lunch dates, the ones I insisted on keeping despite James's disapproval, she'd study my face with concern. "You seem different, sophomore, smaller somehow." I'd dismiss her observations, assuring her that marriage required compromises and James was just under pressure at work. Melanie was more direct. After witnessing James belittle my opinion during a dinner party, she cornered me in the kitchen. "That's not okay, Sophia. The way he speaks to you isn't respect or love." I defended him immediately, listing his stressors and responsibilities, explaining away his behavior with practiced ease. Melanie's worried expression only deepened. I had become an expert in rationalization. When James checked my phone, it was because communication is important in marriage. When he criticized my friends, it was because he wants what's best for me. When he controlled our finances, it was because he's better with money. The mental gymnastics exhausted me, but the alternative, acknowledging the reality of my marriage, seemed too frightening to face. Deep down, I knew things weren't right. On sleepless nights when James snored beside me, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder when I had become so careful around the person who was supposed to be my safe place. I wondered if all marriages evolved this way, enthusiasm giving way to endurance. I wondered if the hollow feeling in my chest when James criticized me was normal or if other wives felt it too. But each morning, I'd push those thoughts away, focusing instead on the practical aspects of our life together, the beautiful home, the financial stability, the respected social position. I'd remind myself of the early days, convincing myself that the real James was still in there somewhere, just buried under work stress and responsibility. I believed if I just tried harder, was more understanding, more supportive, more perfect, he would return to the man who had once made me feel so loved. That was the complex web I had woven around myself by the time my 34th birthday arrived, a web of justifications, compromises, and diminishing expectations. I had no idea that my birthday party would become the event that finally made this fragile construction collapse around me. When my 34th birthday approached, I made an uncharacteristically bold decision. Despite James suggesting we keep it simple this year with just dinner at a restaurant, I announced my intention to host a proper party at our home. Something inside me rebelled against another muted celebration. After the year we'd had, James's increasing criticism, my growing isolation, I craved connection, warmth, and genuine joy. "It's just a small gathering," I explained to James over breakfast 3 weeks before the date. "Just close friends and family in the backyard." He frowned, not looking up from his phone. "Seems like a lot of unnecessary work and expense." "I want to do it," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "I'll handle everything." James sighed, the sound I'd come to recognize as his disapproval. "People will think you're attention-seeking, making such a fuss about a birthday." I flinched but pressed on. "It's not a fuss. Just food, drinks, and people we care about." He finally looked up, his expression softening slightly in the way that always gave me hope. "Fine. But keep the budget reasonable. And don't expect me to play host all night." I nodded quickly, grateful for his reluctant permission, ignoring the voice in my head asking why I needed permission at all. The preparations became my secret joy in the weeks that followed. Each detail was a small act of reclaiming something I couldn't quite name. I ordered a beautiful cake from Magnolia Bakery, 3 layers of vanilla sponge with raspberry filling and buttercream frosting, instead of the practical, sugar-free option James would have preferred. I spent evenings after work transforming our backyard, draping fairy lights across the wooden pergola and arranging potted hydrangeas around the patio. I found vintage-style paper lanterns online and hung them from tree branches. I created a playlist of songs I loved but rarely played at home because James found them annoying. Each decision felt like a tiny rebellion, innocent enough on the surface but profound in what they represented. The morning of the party, my sister Haley arrived early to help with final preparations. We moved around the kitchen together, preparing appetizers and mixing a batch of my grandmother's famous punch, a recipe passed down that included fresh strawberries, lemonade, and a secret ingredient that made it irresistible. "The yard looks amazing, Soph," Haley said, arranging cheese and crackers on a serving board. "You've thought of everything." "Thanks," I smiled, feeling a genuine flicker of pride. I wanted it to be special. "And James? Is he helping later?" Haley's tone was carefully neutral, but I caught the underlying skepticism. I focused on chopping vegetables. "He has meetings this morning, but he promised to be home by 4 to help set up the bar." Haley nodded but said nothing. After a moment of silence, she asked, "Are you okay, Sophia? You seem anxious." I hadn't realized how obvious my tension was. "I'm fine. Just want everything to be perfect." "For the guests or for James?" She held my gaze until I looked away. "For everyone." "For me," I said, but the truth hovered between us. I was anxious about James's reaction to everything, the decorations he might find excessive, the food he might critique, the friends he might think I was showing off for. "Did I tell you what he said when I mentioned the party?" The words spilled out before I could stop them. "He said I was attention-seeking." Haley's hand stilled on the serving board. "For wanting a birthday celebration?" "Sophia, that's not normal." "He's just practical. He doesn't see the point of celebrations." The defense was automatic, well-rehearsed. "There's practical, and then there's controlling," Haley said gently. "When did you start second-guessing your right to celebrate your own birthday?" I didn't have an answer that didn't sound alarming, even to myself. Instead, I changed the subject, asking her to check if we had enough ice. But her question lingered, making me uncomfortably aware of how I'd internalized James's perspective. By early afternoon, the house was prepared, food was ready, and I allowed myself a moment of optimism. Maybe today would be different. Maybe the warm atmosphere, the gathering of people who cared about us, would remind James of the connection we once had. Maybe he would see how much effort I'd put into creating something beautiful and feel proud rather than critical. I checked my phone, no messages from James, though he should have finished his meetings by now. I sent a quick text. "Everything's ready. See you at 4?" The message showed as delivered but remained unanswered. I pushed away my disappointment and went upstairs to get dressed. I'd bought a new outfit for the occasion, a deep blue sundress that made my eyes stand out and hugged my figure in a way that made me feel confident. I styled my hair in loose waves, applied makeup carefully, and added the silver necklace my mother had given me before she passed away, a small heart pendant that always made me feel she was close. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Not because of the dress or makeup, but because of the spark in my eyes that had been absent for so long. The woman staring back at me looked alive, excited, present, a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. My phone chimed with a message from James, running late. "Work emergency. We'll try to make it on time." The familiar disappointment settled over me, dimming my momentary brightness. But I took a deep breath and made a decision: I would not let his absence diminish this day. I deserved to enjoy my birthday, whether James participated fully or not. The first guests arrived at 5, Melanie and her husband David, bearing gifts and warm hugs. More friends followed, colleagues from the hospital, neighbors, Haley's husband Paul. Soon the backyard was filled with conversation and laughter, exactly as I'd imagined. I circulated among my guests, accepting birthday wishes and compliments on the beautiful setting. But I couldn't stop myself from checking my phone every few minutes or glancing toward the gate whenever someone arrived. By 6:30, with no sign of James and no further messages, I noticed some guests exchanging looks of concern or awkward smiles when they asked where my husband was. Work emergency, I explained repeatedly, the words feeling more hollow each time. My anxiety spiked when Lisa and Mark, friends from James's office, arrived. We thought James would be here already, Lisa said. We saw him leaving the building around 3 with Amanda. Amanda? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. His new colleague from the marketing team, Mark explained. Tall blonde, started last month? I nodded as if I knew exactly who they meant, though James had never mentioned an Amanda. A cold feeling settled in my stomach as I excused myself to check my phone again. That's when James's message arrived, on my way. Bringing Amanda from work. She's new in town and had nothing to do tonight. I stared at the screen, my hands suddenly cold despite the warm evening. James had left work hours ago with this woman but was only now heading home, and had invited her to my birthday party without discussion. I took a deep breath, typed OK, and returned to my guests with a smile that felt brittle enough to shatter. By 7 o'clock, the party was in full swing. Fairy lights twinkled against the darkening sky, music flowed through outdoor speakers, and my guests mingled comfortably in the space I'd created. I was trying my best to be present, to appreciate the effort everyone had made to celebrate with me, but James's absence had left a hollow space I couldn't ignore. Stop checking your phone, Melanie whispered, appearing at my side with a fresh glass of wine. You've created something beautiful here. Enjoy it. I smiled gratefully at her, tucking my phone into my pocket. You're right. I'm being ridiculous. Not ridiculous, she corrected gently. Conditioned. Before I could respond, movement at the gate caught my attention. James had finally arrived, and beside him stood a woman who could only be Amanda, tall, slender, with cascading blonde hair and the kind of polished appearance that seemed effortless but undoubtedly wasn't. She wore a cream-colored designer dress that made my carefully chosen blue sundress feel suddenly inadequate. James didn't scan the yard for me as he entered. Instead, he leaned close to Amanda, saying something that made her laugh, his hand lightly touching her lower back as he guided her into the party. The casual intimacy of the gesture sent a shock through me. When James finally approached me, his greeting was perfunctory, a quick kiss on the cheek that barely made contact. Happy birthday, Sophia. Sorry we're late. This is Amanda, my new marketing specialist. Amanda extended her hand with a practiced smile. Happy birthday. James has told me so much about you. This party is adorable. Did you do all this yourself? The condescension in her tone was subtle but unmistakable. I shook her hand and thanked her for coming, aware of James watching our interaction with an intensity that made me nervous. Let me get you both drinks, I offered, falling automatically into hostess mode. I'll come with you, James said, following me to the drinks table while Amanda struck up a conversation with some other guests. At the table, he leaned close, his voice low. You could have waited for me before starting the party. The invitation said 6 o'clock, James. It's past 7. I told you I had a work emergency. I busied myself with pouring wine. Was the emergency before or after you left the office at 3 with Amanda? His expression hardened. Who told you that? Lisa and Mark are here. They saw you leaving. Are you spying on me now? His tone made my hands shake slightly as I handed him the glasses. It's my birthday party, James. I was worried when you didn't show up. He leaned closer, his smile not reaching his eyes. Well, I'm here now. And do you really need to wear that much makeup? You look like you're trying too hard. Before I could respond, he was walking away, carrying both wine glasses to where Amanda stood chatting with our neighbors. I watched as he handed her a glass, their fingers brushing, her laugh rising above the music as he said something apparently hilarious. Throughout the next hour, I observed James and Amanda from across the yard. While I circulated among guests, trying to be the gracious birthday girl, James remained glued to Amanda's side. He introduced her to our friends with an enthusiasm he rarely showed when introducing me. His hand frequently found her arm or shoulder, lingering longer than necessary. When she spoke, he listened with complete attention, the kind of focused interest I hadn't received from him in years. The knot in my stomach grew tighter, but I maintained my smile, determined not to let others see my distress. Only Haley and Melanie seemed to notice, exchanging concerned glances whenever James's behavior became particularly obvious. Around 8:30, Melanie clinked her glass for attention and proposed a toast. To Sophia, she began, her warm gaze finding me in the crowd. Not just an incredible nurse who has helped countless children, but one of the most genuine, kind-hearted people I've ever known. Your strength and compassion inspire everyone around you, even when you don't realize it. The world is better because you're in it. Happy birthday, my friend. The guests raised their glasses, echoing happy birthday, and I felt a surge of genuine emotion. Melanie's words, the recognition of qualities I'd begun to doubt I possessed, broke through my carefully maintained composure. I laughed, a real laugh that came from somewhere deep and authentic, as tears of appreciation threatened. Thank you all for being here, I said, my voice steady despite my emotion. Having the people I care about gathered together is the best gift I could ask for. As conversation resumed, I noticed James watching me from across the yard, his jaw tight. The brief joy I'd felt from Melanie's toast dimmed under his cold gaze. I realized what had triggered his displeasure. I had been the center of attention, receiving recognition he hadn't granted or controlled. Shortly after, Haley approached with a beautifully wrapped package. This is from Paul and me, she said, guiding me to a chair. Open it now. Inside was a framed photograph I'd never seen before, my mother, Haley, and me at the beach when I was about 12. Mom was in the middle, an arm around each of us, all three laughing into the camera with identical crinkled eyes. It had been taken just months before her diagnosis. Where did you find this? I asked, tracing my mother's face with my finger. Dad had it in an old album. I had it restored and framed. Haley squeezed my shoulder. She would be so proud of the woman you've become, Sophia. The photograph unlocked memories of my mother's strength, how she'd raised us largely alone after leaving our father's emotional abuse, how she'd built a new life centered on her own values rather than someone else's approval. Tears welled in my eyes as I realized how far I'd strayed from her example. Remember what she always told us? Haley asked softly. I nodded. Your joy is not negotiable, we recited together, and I felt something shift inside me, a recognition, a remembering of who I was beneath years of James's subtle erosion. The moment was shattered by James's voice. Sophia, if you're done with the emotional display, we should cut the cake. Some people need to leave soon. I looked up to see him standing over us, Amanda hovering nearby. The contrast between Haley's gift and James's dismissive tone created a cognitive dissonance I couldn't ignore. I composed myself and moved toward the table where the beautiful cake waited. As guests gathered, I tried to include James in the moment, handing him a knife so we could cut the first slice together. His participation was reluctant, his smile stiff for the photos Melanie took. After serving cake, I noticed James and Amanda in intense conversation at the edge of the party. His expression was animated in a way it rarely was with me anymore, while she nodded eagerly at whatever he was saying. When she laughed loudly at something he whispered, they both glanced in my direction before quickly looking away. I was returning from the kitchen with more napkins when I passed close enough to overhear Amanda say, "All this trouble for a birthday. It's a bit much, isn't it?" James's response was too low to catch, but their shared laughter felt like a physical blow. In my distraction, I bumped into Amanda, accidentally spilling red wine from my glass onto her cream-colored dress. She gasped dramatically, jumping back as if I'd thrown acid rather than Cabernet. Oh my God. This is Stella McCartney. I'm so sorry, I said immediately, grabbing napkins. It was an accident. Before I could help, James was there, his arm protectively around Amanda's shoulders. What happened? His tone implied the question was merely formality, he'd already assigned blame. It was an accident, I repeated, extending napkins toward Amanda. James intercepted them. Let me help you clean up, he told Amanda, leading her toward the house with a solicitousness he hadn't shown me in years. Over his shoulder, he shot me a look of pure irritation. "Sophia, we'll talk about this inside." As they disappeared into the house, I stood frozen, aware of nearby guests pretending they hadn't noticed the scene. The party atmosphere had shifted, discomfort rippling through conversations. I felt humiliation wash over me, followed quickly by an unfamiliar anger. On my birthday, in my home, my husband was comforting another woman while making me feel like an embarrassment. That anger, unexpected but clarifying, straightened my spine as I turned to follow them into the kitchen. The kitchen door swung shut behind me, muffling the party sounds and creating a sudden bubble of tense silence. James stood with Amanda at the sink, dabbing at her dress with a wet cloth. Their heads were close together, and they were speaking in low tones that immediately ceased when I entered. "Let me help," I offered, moving toward them with paper towels. "You've done enough," James snapped, his voice cold. He turned to Amanda with a completely transformed expression, concern replacing anger. "I'm so sorry about this. Sophia can be clumsy when she drinks." "I'm not drunk, James. It was an accident." My voice came out steadier than I expected. Amanda looked between us, seeming to sense the undercurrents. "It's fine, really. I should probably head out anyway. Early meeting tomorrow." She smiled at James. "Thanks for inviting me. The party was interesting." "I'll walk you out," James offered immediately. "No need," she replied. "I can find my way." "Thanks again, and, happy birthday." This last part was directed at me with an awkward smile before she slipped out the side door. As soon as she was gone, James rounded on me. "What the hell was that about?" "What was what about?" "The spill was an accident." He stepped closer, lowering his voice though the kitchen door remained closed. "You embarrassed me in front of my colleague." "I embarrassed you?" The injustice of his accusation ignited something in me. "You showed up 3 hours late to my birthday party with a woman you never mentioned, then spent the entire evening with her instead of me." "Don't be dramatic. Amanda is new to the city and doesn't know anyone." I was being professional. "Professional?" I laughed incredulously. "Is that what you call whispering and laughing together all night? Or making fun of my party?" James's eyes narrowed. "So you were watching us? Jealous, Sophia? That's not attractive." "This isn't about jealousy. It's about respect." I was surprised by my own directness. "You haven't shown me any tonight." "Respect?" he scoffed. "Like the respect you showed when you were flirting with David all evening?" The accusation was so unexpected I actually gasped. "David? Melanie's husband? I barely spoke to him." "I saw you laughing at everything he said," touching his arm. "Do you think I'm blind?" I shook my head, genuinely confused. "That's not what happened, and you know it." "Don't tell me what I know," he hissed, moving closer. "I know what I saw." I realized with sudden clarity that James was creating a narrative where I was at fault, a tactic he'd used countless times before. But tonight, with the contrast between Melanie and Haley's genuine care and his cold dismissal, I couldn't accept it. "This conversation isn't about David," I said firmly. "It's about you and Amanda, and the way you've treated me on my birthday." Something dangerous flashed in James's eyes, the look that usually made me back down. But the photograph of my mother had awakened something in me, a determination I hadn't felt in years. "While we're having honest conversations," James said, his voice deceptively calm, "I've been offered the national director position." Congratulations." I was thrown by the sudden topic change. "It's in Chicago. I've accepted it. We'll be moving next month." The casual way he delivered this life-altering news, a decision made without any discussion, stunned me. "You accepted a job in another city without talking to me first?" "I knew you'd make it difficult." "It's a huge opportunity, Sophia." "What about my job? My sister? Our home?" Each question made the magnitude of his unilateral decision clearer. James shrugged. You can find another nursing position. It's not like you're irreplaceable at that hospital. The dismissal of my career, my identity, was so casual it took my breath away. And you didn't think this warranted a conversation with your wife? I'm telling you now, aren't I? This is why I avoid these discussions. You always overreact. A terrible suspicion formed in my mind. Does this have anything to do with Amanda? James's face transformed, rage replacing condescension. What are you implying? She's in marketing. You're taking a marketing director position. It seems like a reasonable question. You think I'm sleeping with her? His voice rose dangerously. Is that what you think of me? I don't know what to think anymore, James. You're making massive decisions without me, spending more time with her tonight than with me, criticizing everything I do. Because you're acting like a child. Throwing yourself a party, seeking attention, embarrassing me in front of colleagues. The absurdity of his anger over a birthday party suddenly struck me. Here was my husband, a grown man, furious that his wife wanted to celebrate her birthday with friends. The realization bubbled up inside me, and before I could stop it, a short laugh escaped. The sound of my laugh seemed to freeze the air between us. James's expression shifted from anger to something darker, more dangerous. You think this is funny? No, It happened so quickly I didn't see it coming. His hand connected with my cheek in a sharp, stinging slap that silenced the room. The force of it knocked me back slightly, my hand automatically rising to my face. For several heartbeats, we stood in horrified silence, both seemingly unable to process what had just occurred. The imprint of his hand burned on my skin, but the shock ran deeper. In 8 years of marriage, through all the criticism and control, James had never physically struck me. I stared at him, watching his expression transition from rage to shock to something that looked like fear. My eyes filled with tears, not from pain but from the final shattering of illusions about my marriage. And then, from some deep, unexpected place within me, came laughter. It started small, a chuckle of disbelief that grew into full-throated, uncontainable laughter. It wasn't hysteria or nervousness, it was liberation. In that moment of crystal clarity, I saw the absurdity of it all, how I had diminished myself year after year, how I had accepted less and less, how I had forgotten my own worth. James looked utterly bewildered by my reaction. Sophia, stop it. Stop laughing. But I couldn't stop. Years of tension released in waves of laughter that bent me double. The more he demanded I stop, the harder I laughed, tears streaming down my face. Have you lost your mind? He hissed, glancing nervously at the door that separated us from our guests. No, I managed between bouts of laughter. I think I've finally found it. The kitchen door burst open, and Haley rushed in, followed closely by Melanie. Their expressions shifted from concern to alarm when they saw me holding my reddened cheek, still laughing through tears. What happened? Haley demanded, moving immediately to my side. Nothing, James said quickly. Sophia's upset and we're having a private conversation. Did you hit her? Melanie asked bluntly, looking between my marked cheek and James's defensive posture. Of course not. She's being hysterical. My laughter finally subsided enough for me to speak. He slapped me, I said simply, the words bringing a strange calm. Because I laughed when he told me he accepted a job in Chicago without discussing it with me. The room went completely silent. Other guests had gathered in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. David pushed through, positioning himself between James and me. I think you should step outside, James, he said quietly but firmly. This is my house, James protested, looking around for support and finding none. This is between me and my wife. Not anymore, Haley said, her arm protectively around my shoulders. Not after you put your hands on my sister. James's face flushed with anger and embarrassment as he realized how many witnesses were present. He attempted damage control, his tone shifting to concern. Sophia's had too much to drink. She's not herself. I was trying to calm her down and she fell. Stop, I interrupted, my voice surprisingly strong. Everyone here heard what I said. Don't make it worse by lying. James looked at me with a mixture of rage and panic. His carefully constructed image was crumbling, and he had no script for this scenario. He turned to the gathered guests, attempting a rueful smile. I apologize for the drama, everyone. Clearly, this party is over. Without waiting for a response, he pushed past David and stormed out through the side door, the slam echoing through the silent kitchen. As the tension broke, guests began awkwardly gathering their belongings, murmuring sympathetic words as they left. I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of my birthday party and my marriage, feeling strangely calm amid the chaos. My laugh had changed everything. In that moment of crisis, instead of shrinking and apologizing as I had for years, I had laughed in the face of his control. And that simple, unexpected reaction had revealed the truth to us both: he had no power over me that I didn't allow him to have. Within 20 minutes, the backyard that had been filled with celebration was nearly empty. Guests departed with concerned glances and gentle touches on my arm, their discomfort with witnessing such a private implosion evident in their hurried goodbyes. I moved through these moments in a state of surreal detachment, thanking people for coming as if this were a normal end to a normal party. Amanda had disappeared during the confrontation. James had stormed out to his car and driven away, but not before attempting one final manipulation, loudly telling anyone within earshot that I was having another emotional episode and he was giving me space to calm down. Few seemed convinced. Once the last guest besides Haley and Melanie had left, the three of us stood in the kitchen, the remains of birthday cake and scattered glasses creating a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere. "Are you okay?" Melanie asked, gently pressing an ice pack to my cheek where a faint red mark was still visible. The laughter that had erupted so unexpectedly earlier had completely subsided, leaving in its wake a profound emotional exhaustion. The tears came then, not the controlled, pretty tears I'd learned to cry in front of James, but ugly, body-shaking sobs that bent me double. Haley guided me to a kitchen chair, keeping a steady arm around my shoulders. "Let it out, sophomore. You're safe now." "I don't understand what happened," I managed between sobs. "How did we get here? How did I let this happen?" "You didn't let anything happen," Melanie said firmly, kneeling in front of me. "James did this. Not you." As my tears subsided, Haley pressed a glass of water into my hands. "Drink this. Then we're going to talk." I obeyed automatically, the cold water grounding me back in reality. The three of us moved to the living room, away from the party debris, and sat close together on the sofa. "I need to ask you something important," Haley said, her expression serious. "Has he hit you before tonight?" "No," I answered truthfully. "Never. He's been critical, controlling, dismissive, but never physical." "Until tonight," Melanie added quietly. I nodded, touching my cheek absently. I think I shocked him as much as myself when I laughed. "Why did you laugh?" Haley asked, not accusingly but with genuine curiosity. I considered the question carefully. Because in that moment, everything became so clear. How absurd it was that I'd been walking on eggshells in my own home, planning my own birthday party around his approval, making myself smaller and smaller to accommodate his ego. I shook my head. When he slapped me, it was like the final confirmation that I wasn't crazy. That the problem wasn't me. A heavy silence settled as my words sank in. Then Melanie spoke, her voice gentle but determined. "We need to tell you some things, Sophia. Things we've seen but haven't said directly because we were afraid of pushing you away." Over the next hour, my sister and best friend shared observations and concerns they'd harbored for years. Haley described how James had systematically isolated me from friends, recounting invitations I'd declined with excuses she knew weren't genuine. Melanie revealed how James had made inappropriate comments to her when I wasn't present, suggesting she was distracting me from my wifely duties. "Remember last Christmas when you left early from our party because James had a headache?" Haley asked. After you left, he texted Melanie. Melanie nodded grimly. He said we were a bad influence on you and he thought it would be better if we limited our interaction. My shock must have been evident because Haley quickly added, we never agreed to that, obviously. But it shows how he was trying to control who you spent time with. As they spoke, memories surfaced, instances I dismissed or rationalized at the time but now recognized as part of a pattern. How James checked my phone regularly under the guise of using it to look something up. How he questioned every expense and controlled our finances despite my stable income. How he discouraged me from applying for the nursing leadership position I'd wanted, saying I wasn't assertive enough for management. I knew things weren't perfect, I admitted, but I kept thinking if I just tried harder, communicated better, was more understanding of his stress. My voice trailed off as I realized how thoroughly I'd internalized responsibility for his behavior. That's what abusers want you to think, Haley said bluntly. That's what Dad did to Mom, remember? Always her fault, never his. The parallel hit me with unexpected force. I'd been so determined not to see the similarities between my father's treatment of my mother and James's treatment of me that I'd ignored obvious warning signs. You can stay with us tonight, Haley offered. Paul's already getting the guest room ready. My instinctive response was to refuse, to say I needed to be here when James returned so we could talk things through. The thought pattern was so habitual I almost voiced it before catching myself. That's probably smart. Just for tonight, while things cool down. Melanie and Haley exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. What? I asked. Sophia, Melanie said carefully, are you thinking about going back to him after this? I don't know, I answered honestly. This is all happening so fast. I understand, Haley said, though her expression suggested otherwise. But while you're figuring things out, I want you to have some information. She reached into her purse and pulled out several pamphlets on domestic abuse and a business card for a women's support center. I'm not, I began automatically, then stopped myself. Okay. As Haley went to call Paul, Melanie helped me pack an overnight bag. Moving through the bedroom I shared with James felt strange, like visiting a movie set of my life rather than the actual place I'd lived for years. I packed methodically, clothes, toiletries, medication. My hand hesitated over the framed wedding photo on the dresser before deliberately leaving it behind. When we returned downstairs, I suggested we clean up the party mess, but Haley was adamant. Leave it. James can deal with it. The three of us moved around the yard, collecting my most personal items, gifts from guests, the framed photo of Mom, my purse and phone. As we gathered these pieces of my life, I felt a strange combination of grief and relief washing over me in alternating waves. Before leaving, I needed a moment alone. I told Haley and Melanie I'd meet them at the car and return to the kitchen, where remnants of my birthday cake still sat on the counter. I stood there, looking at the beautiful cake I'd chosen for myself, now partially eaten, the decorative frosting flowers crushed on one side where someone had carelessly cut through them. It struck me as a perfect metaphor for my marriage, something that had once been beautiful, created with care and hope, now irrevocably damaged by carelessness and cruelty. As I turned to leave, I noticed my mother's old journal on the bookshelf where I kept my cookbooks. I hadn't opened it in years, but something compelled me to take it now. I slipped it into my bag before joining Haley and Melanie outside. The drive to Haley's house was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. In the back seat, I opened my mother's journal to a random page, her familiar handwriting bringing both comfort and pain. Today I finally found the courage to leave. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I realized staying teaches Sophia and Haley that love should hurt. Their joy is not negotiable. Neither is mine. Tears filled my eyes as I read her words written over 20 years ago that seemed meant precisely for this moment. My mother had faced this same decision and found the strength to choose herself, to choose us. As we pulled into Haley's driveway, I made no firm declarations about my future. I didn't know yet what tomorrow would bring or what decisions I would ultimately make. But sitting in the car, holding my mother's journal, I felt something shift inside me, a recognition that the path forward, whatever it might be, needed to include the reclamation of my joy, my voice, and my laugh. Paul greeted us at the door with gentle concern, helping carry my bags to the guest room without pressing for details. The spare room was simple but comfortable, neutral walls, a queen bed with fresh linens, a small desk by the window. It contained nothing of James, nothing of our shared history, nothing that required me to be less than my full self. As I unpacked the few items I'd brought, I came across the birthday gift from Haley again, the photograph of my mother with her arms around us, all three smiling with identical crinkled eyes. I placed it on the nightstand where it would be the first thing I'd see in the morning. That night, in a bed that wasn't mine, in a house where I didn't need to monitor my words or actions for potential criticism, I made a single, small promise to myself: whatever came next, I would face it with the same courage my mother had shown. I would remember that my joy was not negotiable. And with that thought, I fell into the deepest sleep I'd had in years, the sound of my own genuine laughter still echoing in my memory, the laugh that had finally broken the spell. The guest room in Haley's apartment became my home for the next 2 weeks. What had started as just for tonight extended as the reality of my situation became clearer with each passing day. The morning after the party, I'd woken to 27 missed calls and dozens of text messages from James, ranging from apologetic to accusatory to threatening. "I'm so sorry, Sophia. I don't know what happened. Please come home so we can talk. You're overreacting as usual. It wasn't that serious. If you're staying with Haley, she's poisoning you against me. She's always been jealous of our relationship. If you don't come home by tomorrow, I'll cancel all your credit cards. This childishness has to stop." Each message revealed more about the man I'd married than he probably intended. With some distance and perspective, I could see the manipulation tactics clearly, the apologies without true accountability, the blame shifting, the attempts to drive wedges between me and my support system, the financial threats. James's attempts to contact me escalated over those first few days. He sent enormous flower arrangements to Haley's apartment with cards pleading for forgiveness. When those were returned, he began showing up unannounced, ringing the doorbell repeatedly until Haley threatened to call the police. He waited outside in his car for hours, watching the entrance. On the 4th day, I received a text that chilled me: "If you don't come home, I might do something drastic. I can't live without you. Is that what you want? To destroy me?" That message prompted my first call to the domestic violence hotline I'd found in the pamphlets Haley gave me. The counselor helped me recognize the suicide threat as another manipulation tactic and suggested I document everything in case I needed a restraining order. On day 7, when James appeared at Boston Children's Hospital during my shift, cornering me in the staff lounge with accusations about humiliating him publicly, I finally took legal action. The process of filing for a temporary restraining order was both empowering and terrifying. Seeing our private struggles documented in official language made everything more real. "Do you think this is necessary?" the court advocate asked gently after reviewing my petition. "Has he threatened physical violence since the incident at your party?" I thought about his escalating behavior, the boundary violations, the refusal to accept my need for space. "He hasn't threatened to hit me again," I said carefully. "But he's showing me he doesn't respect my boundaries. And I'm afraid of what happens when someone who's already crossed one line realizes they're losing control." The advocate nodded, understanding what I wasn't explicitly saying. The temporary order was granted that afternoon. Alongside these practical steps, I began attending weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Renata Chen, a psychologist specializing in relationship trauma. Our first session was largely me defending James between tears. "He's under so much pressure at work. He's not usually like this. It was just one time." Dr. Chen listened patiently before asking, "Sophia, if your sister Haley told you her husband had slapped her at her birthday party, what would you tell her?" The question stopped me short. "I'd tell her to leave and never look back," I admitted quietly. "Why do you deserve less care than you would give your sister?" That simple question became a touchstone in the weeks that followed. In our sessions, I began unpacking the patterns in my relationship with James, how his criticism had gradually eroded my self-confidence, how I'd learned to anticipate his disapproval and adjust my behavior accordingly, how I'd slowly lost touch with friends, interests, and parts of myself that didn't fit his vision of who I should be. What you're describing is called coercive control, Dr. Chen explained. It's a pattern of behavior that strips away the victim's sense of self and independence without necessarily leaving visible bruises. Understanding that there was a name for what I'd experienced, that others had walked this path before me, brought both validation and grief. I mourned the years I'd spent diminishing myself, the opportunities I'd declined to avoid James's disapproval, the friendships that had withered under his subtle sabotage. But amid this grief came unexpected reconnections. Melanie helped me reach out to old friends I'd lost touch with, women who welcomed me back with open arms and without judgment. My colleague Diane, who had invited me to join her book club for years only to be repeatedly turned down, simply said, "The invitation still stands whenever you're ready." I attended my first meeting 2 weeks after the party, discovering the joy of discussing ideas freely without calculating how James might react. Work became a sanctuary. I'd always loved nursing, but now I threw myself into it with renewed purpose. When the nursing director position I'd once been interested in opened again, my supervisor Gail approached me directly. "You should apply, Sophia. You've been ready for years." In the past, I would have deflected, remembering James's assessment that I wasn't assertive enough for management. Instead, I heard myself say, "I think you're right. I'll submit my application this week." The outside world wasn't uniformly supportive, of course. James had begun a campaign to control the narrative among our mutual friends. Some believed his version of events, that I'd had some kind of breakdown, that I was being influenced by my man-hating sister, that I was throwing away our marriage over one mistake. Others reached out privately to offer support, including James's sister Catherine. "I believe you," she texted one evening. "I've seen how he talks to you. How he talks about you when you're not there. Please be careful, Sophia. He's not handling this well." Her warning was confirmed when Haley and I went to the house to collect more of my belongings 3 weeks after the party. We'd arranged for a police officer to accompany us, a precaution that seemed excessive until we arrived to find James had changed the locks. Only the officer's intervention convinced him to let us in, and even then, he followed us from room to room, questioning every item I packed. "That necklace was a gift from me. Those books were joint purchases. That's my mother's casserole dish." His voice rose with each claim, his face flushed with anger. I left behind anything he contested, including the expensive watch he'd given me for our anniversary and the designer clothes he'd selected to make me more presentable for his work functions. What I couldn't leave behind were my mother's possessions, her journals, her wedding ring, the quilt she'd made during her final months. When James tried to claim these too, something in me hardened. "No," I said firmly, meeting his gaze directly. "These were never yours to give or take." His mouth opened, likely to argue, but something in my expression stopped him. Perhaps it was the absence of fear, or the certainty in my voice that was so different from my usual placating tone. Whatever the reason, he stepped back, and I walked out with my mother's treasures intact. The divorce proceedings began in earnest after that day. James initially refused mediation, convinced he could pressure me into returning. His attorney sent threatening letters about financial repercussions, alimony claims, and property division that painted me as a gold digger abandoning a devoted husband. "He's trying to scare you," my attorney Victoria explained. "But Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, and his behavior will be considered. Document everything, the restraining order, any violations, threatening messages. And prepare for this to get uglier before it gets better." She was right. James's tactics grew more desperate as he realized I wasn't coming back. He contacted my parents' old friends, my elderly aunt in Florida, even my college roommate, asking them to talk sense into me. He spread rumors at the hospital about my mental stability, forcing me to have an uncomfortable conversation with my supervisor. He showed up at my therapy appointments twice, requiring the building to enhance their security protocols. Through it all, my support system remained steadfast. Haley never once suggested I was overstaying my welcome in her guest room. Melanie accompanied me to court dates when the restraining order needed renewal. My therapy group, 5 other women at various stages of leaving controlling relationships, provided understanding no one else could. Amid these challenges came an unexpected encounter that shifted my perspective further. I was leaving the hospital after a late shift when I heard someone call my name. Turning, I saw Amanda, James's colleague from my birthday party, hurrying across the parking garage. My first instinct was to keep walking, to avoid whatever awkwardness or accusation might follow. But something in her expression, anxiety mixed with determination, made me pause. "Sophia, I'm so glad I caught you," she said, slightly breathless. "I've been trying to find a way to reach you that James wouldn't know about." "What do you want?" I asked, more defensively than I'd intended. She glanced around nervously before speaking. "I need to apologize. For the party, for everything. James told me you were having problems, that you were jealous and controlling. He said bringing me along might help show you he could have female friends without anything inappropriate. He completely misrepresented what was happening." I listened silently, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected confession. "After what happened at the party, I started noticing things at work," she continued. "How he talked about you to colleagues, how he tried to get me alone in situations that made me uncomfortable." She looked down. "2 weeks ago, he suggested a business trip together where we'd need to share a suite to save the company money. Did you report him?" I asked. Amanda nodded. "To HR. I wasn't the only one, apparently. He lost the Chicago promotion, and he's on probation pending an investigation. The information should have brought satisfaction, but instead, I felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. The man I'd loved, whose approval I'd desperately sought for years, was exactly who I'd finally recognized him to be on my birthday, someone who viewed relationships as transactions, who used people as pawns in his personal chess game." "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "It helps to know I wasn't imagining things." "You definitely weren't," Amanda replied earnestly. "And I'm sorry I was part of it, even unknowingly." As she walked away, I realized something significant had shifted inside me. For months, I'd carried a small, nagging doubt, a voice questioning whether I'd overreacted, whether the slap had truly justified appending my entire life. Amanda's confirmation of James's pattern of manipulation silenced that doubt permanently. That night, sitting cross-legged on the bed in Haley's guest room, I opened my mother's journal again. I'd been reading it chronologically since leaving James, following her journey from confusion to clarity, from fear to determination. I'd reached an entry from just after she'd left my father. "The hardest part isn't leaving. The hardest part is trusting yourself enough to stay gone. To believe that your perceptions are valid when someone has spent years telling you they aren't. To rebuild your sense of self when pieces have been chipped away so gradually you didn't notice until you were unrecognizable even to yourself." Her words resonated deeply. The woman I'd been at the beginning of my 34th year seemed like a stranger now, someone who monitored her laugh, her opinions, her friendships, her ambitions to avoid triggering her husband's disapproval. The woman I was becoming felt both new and strangely familiar, like rediscovering an old friend I'd lost touch with. 5 weeks after my birthday party, I signed the lease on a small apartment of my own, a bright one-bedroom with big windows and a tiny balcony where I could grow the herbs James had deemed a waste of space in our backyard. Haley helped me shop for furniture that reflected my taste, not what James had declared appropriate for a couple of our standing. I hung art that made me happy, arranged books by color instead of alphabetically as James had insisted, and played music without headphones. Each small decision became an act of reclamation. I registered for a photography class I'd always been interested in but had avoided because James thought it was frivolous. I reconnected with my college friend Zoe, who James had disliked for her excessive politics. I applied for the nursing leadership position and made it to the final round of interviews. The night before that interview, I stood in front of the mirror in my new apartment, practicing answers to potential questions. My reflection showed someone I was still getting to know, a woman with more confidence in her eyes and fewer apologies in her speech. When I laughed at my own nervousness, the sound was full and unrestricted, no longer the careful, contained laugh I'd developed during my marriage. That laugh, my real laugh, had become symbolic of my journey. The unexpected laugh that erupted in my kitchen when James slapped me hadn't been hysteria as he claimed. It had been recognition. In that painful moment, something authentic had broken through years of conditioning, the real Sophia responding to the absurdity of allowing someone else to define my worth. Now, each genuine laugh felt like freedom, like another brick added to the foundation of the life I was rebuilding. A life where my joy was, as my mother had written so many years ago, not negotiable. 6 months after my 34th birthday, the day my marriage effectively ended with a slap and a laugh, I celebrated turning 35 in a way that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. There was no elaborate party, no carefully curated guest list, no anxiety about meeting someone else's expectations. Instead, Haley and a small circle of close friends gathered in my apartment for takeout Thai food, comfortable conversation, and absolutely no pretense. My new apartment had become a true reflection of myself over these months. Colorful throw pillows brightened the second-hand couch, photographs I'd taken in my class lined one wall, and potted plants thrived on every available surface. James would have hated it. That thought, which once would have prompted me to redecorate, now brought only a satisfied smile. "Penny for your thoughts," Melanie said, dropping onto the couch beside me with a fresh glass of wine. "Just reflecting on how much has changed in a year," I replied. Last birthday, I was desperately trying to create a perfect party to please someone who couldn't be pleased. Today, I'm just happy. And I was. The journey hadn't been easy or straightforward, but sitting in my own space, surrounded by people who valued me exactly as I was, I felt a contentment that had eluded me for years. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks earlier, concluding with better terms than James had initially threatened. Victoria, my attorney, had been relentless in countering his attempts to punish me financially for leaving. The documentation of his behavior, the restraining order, the workplace complaints, the threatening messages, had ultimately convinced him to settle rather than risk a judge viewing this evidence. "He doesn't want his colleagues knowing who he really is," Victoria had explained. "Men like James care more about their public image than almost anything else." She had been right. When faced with potential exposure in court, James had retreated, accepting a settlement that allowed me to keep my retirement savings and split our other assets equitably. The house, once the symbol of our supposed success, was being sold, with proceeds to be divided. I'd felt only relief signing the final papers, while James had refused to meet my eyes. Professional growth had paralleled my personal journey. The nursing leadership position I'd applied for, the one James had discouraged me from pursuing years earlier, was now mine. 3 months into the role, I was discovering capabilities I hadn't known I possessed. My team respected my clinical expertise and collaborative approach, and I found unexpected satisfaction in mentoring younger nurses. "Remember when you were worried you weren't assertive enough for management?" Gail had asked during our monthly check-in. "That wasn't my assessment," I'd admitted. "It was James's." Gail had nodded knowingly. "Well, James was wrong. Your style of leadership, thoughtful, inclusive, focused on drawing out others' strengths, is exactly what this department needed." Therapy remained a constant throughout these changes. Dr. Chen had helped me recognize patterns I was still carrying from my marriage, the instinctive apologies, the hesitation before expressing opinions, the tendency to diminish my achievements. Slowly, deliberately, I was unlearning these habits, replacing them with healthier responses. "Healing isn't linear," Dr. Chen reminded me often. "There will be setbacks and triggers. The goal isn't perfection but awareness and growth." She had been right about the triggers. Certain phrases could instantly transport me back to moments of shame or fear with James. The sound of a door slamming still made my heart race. Nightmares occasionally disrupted my sleep, dreams where James appeared in my apartment, where my voice disappeared when I tried to object to his presence, where my laughter turned to tears. But these moments were becoming less frequent, less overwhelming. I developed tools to ground myself when memories surfaced: deep breathing, sensory awareness exercises, reaching out to my support network instead of withdrawing as I once would have. The support group I joined in those early weeks had become another pillar of my recovery. Every Tuesday evening, I sat in a circle with women whose stories echoed aspects of mine, different details but similar patterns of control, isolation, and diminishment. Watching others at various stages of rebuilding their lives provided both inspiration and perspective. The first year is the hardest, Lisa, who was 3 years past her own divorce, told the group. You're not just healing from the relationship. You're rediscovering who you are without it defining you. Her words resonated deeply. I was still discovering facets of myself that had been suppressed during my marriage: my love of spontaneity, my preference for bold colors, my enjoyment of philosophical discussions, my natural inclination toward generosity that James had labeled naive. Each discovery felt like reclaiming another piece of my authentic self. My mother's journal had become a treasured guide through this process. I'd read it cover to cover multiple times, finding new insights with each reading. Her journey paralleled mine in so many ways, though she'd had 2 young daughters to protect while navigating her escape from my father's emotional abuse. Her courage in those circumstances humbled and inspired me. One particular entry had become my mantra: every time I doubt my decision, I remember that my daughters are watching. They're learning what love looks like, what they should expect and accept from partners. What story am I telling them with my choices? Though I didn't have children watching my choices, I understood now that I was teaching myself those same lessons, redefining what I would expect and accept in relationships moving forward. Dating remained a complicated prospect. Several friends had attempted to set me up in recent months, but I declined most introductions, recognizing I wasn't ready for that vulnerability yet. Trust, in others and in my own judgment, was still fragile, still being rebuilt. There had been one exception. 6 weeks ago, I'd met Gabriel, a single father whose daughter Emma had been my patient after a severe asthma attack. Our initial conversations had been purely professional, but I'd noticed his gentle patience with Emma, his attentive listening when I explained treatment plans, his lack of the entitlement some parents displayed toward medical staff. When Emma was discharged, Gabriel had awkwardly asked if I might want to get coffee sometime. The question had triggered immediate anxiety, both attraction and fear, interest and caution. I'm not in a place to date right now, I'd answered honestly. His response had surprised me. I understand. But if friendship is something you're open to, I'd still enjoy that coffee. No pressure either way. We'd met twice since then, casual conversations in public places that felt refreshingly uncomplicated. Gabriel asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He talked about his daughter with love and respect. He laughed easily and seemed comfortable with silence. There was no rush, no pressure, just the gradual unfolding of connection built on mutual respect. Whether this would develop into something more remained to be seen, and I was genuinely okay with that uncertainty. My happiness no longer depended on romantic validation. My worth was no longer tied to someone else's assessment. These were perhaps the most profound changes of the past year, the internal shifts that no one else could see but that had transformed everything. As my 35th birthday gathering continued around me, I excused myself briefly and stepped onto my small balcony. The April evening was cool but pleasant, the city lights twinkling against the darkening sky. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago and the woman I was becoming, not perfect or healed completely, but authentic and growing stronger daily. When Haley joined me outside, carrying a small cake with a single candle, I felt a rush of gratitude for her unwavering support throughout this journey. Make a wish, she said, holding the cake between us. In the past, my wishes had been focused on pleasing James, on becoming what he wanted, on fixing whatever he deemed broken in our relationship. Tonight, my wish was entirely different, not for a relationship or external validation, but for continued strength in this path of self-discovery and healing. I blew out the candle, and Haley hugged me tightly. I'm so proud of you, sophomore. I'm starting to be proud of me too, I replied, surprising myself with the simple truth of it. When we returned inside, Melanie was recounting a story that had everyone laughing. The sound caught me, the genuine, unrestricted laughter of people enjoying each other's company without judgment or fear. I joined in, my own laugh rising clear and strong. That laugh, my real laugh, had been the beginning of my liberation. What James had tried to control, what he had found too loud, too authentic, too unrestrained, had ultimately been the key to my freedom. My laughter in that kitchen moment had been the first step toward reclaiming myself, toward recognizing the absurdity of diminishing my joy to make someone else comfortable with their control. As the evening wound down and friends prepared to leave, I stood in the center of my apartment, my space, my creation, my sanctuary, and felt a deep certainty that had been absent for so long. The path forward would still contain challenges, triggers, moments of doubt. But I would face them as myself, not as the reduced version I had become in my marriage. Sometimes losing what you thought you needed opens the door to finding what you truly deserve. My 35th year would be about discovering exactly what that meant, one authentic laugh at a time. Have you ever experienced a moment when your genuine reaction surprised you and changed everything? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, your joy is not negotiable, and neither is your worth. Thank you for being part of my healing journey, and I wish you the courage to honor your authentic self in all your relationships.